Hello and welcome to the second of a four-part Flipping the Table series recorded at the Old Salt Festival held in June in the Blackfoot Valley of western Montana. The tagline for the festival is Land is Kin, meaning the land and humans are intimately connected. The health of one depends on the other, and vice versa. The Roots of Change team recorded conversations with 9 of the most inspiring speakers at the festival. In this episode, Coco Sanabria and Michael speak with Dr. Stephan van Vliet, who clarifies what is good for the earth and the animals, and what is really good for people. Enjoy the show.
As we have discussed many times on this podcast, meat is controversial and political. Too many people are misinformed, blaming cows for global warming, blaming meat for killing people. This is the result of humans always looking for the simple answer, when reality is much more complex. The real problem is human behavior. It is how we manage land, how we raise livestock, what quality and quantity we eat. The fact is that there are too many of us on this planet, given the way we create energy for civilization, the way we produce and package our food, construct our clothes, and build our homes and places of work. We have shaped the world to make our lives feel easy at the expense of all other life forms and the ecosystems upon which we depend. But what exists was a series of choices, and we can make other choices to reshape our world. This podcast seeks to awaken people to the one component of modern life that touches all other core systems of civilization, and that is the food system. And that is why our team went to the Old Salt Festival in June, where folks were celebrating and cultivating a movement to unwind the mistakes and chart a new course based on the belief that land is kin. We need to do right by the land to enhance life, all of life, human life, the biological, the social, the economic, and even the spiritual. In the second of 4 episodes from our 3 days at the Old Salt Festival, Dr. Stephan van Vliet precisely and compellingly describes how and why meat using regenerative practices is better. It's healthy, meaning it contributes to planetary, animal, and human health. Dr. van Vliet is a research scientist at the Quinney College of Agriculture and Natural Resources at Utah State University. He is a nutrition scientist with expertise in metabolism, nutrition, dietetics, and food science. He earned his PhD in kinesiology as a fellow from the University of Illinois and received clinical research training at 2 schools of medicine. In other words, Stephan is a hitter in the field of nutrition. He is part of a collaborative team that has been deeply comparing and analyzing meat from concentrated animal feeding operations known as CAFOs or feedlots versus those from regenerative livestock operations. The findings are astounding, positive, and will drive the commitment of people to good meat as they become well known. Doris, Coco, and I found this engaging scientist, born in the Netherlands and educated in the U.S., as a real asset for the regenerative movement. We think you will too. Let's begin. Stephan van Vliet, great to meet you here at the Old Salt Festival in Helmville. Coco and I are really interested to hear why you came.
Well, I came because I was invited, first and foremost. But no, I met Cole Mannix, the organizer, about a year or so ago on a different festival. And we're doing a lot of research linking soil health, plant health, animal health, human health. So I was invited to a panel to speak about that work.
Mm-hmm. And so we were talking a little bit before we started about the nutrient density testing research that you're doing. And we work on promoting regenerative agriculture and regenerative ranching and trying to get the University of California to purchase only that kind of meat. And one of the things that we talk about is its nutrient density. So why don't you tell us what the latest findings are?
Well, the latest findings are that the difference between grass-fed and grain-fed beef is probably more pronounced or larger than people expect. What we're finding is that besides omega-3 fatty acids being higher in grass-fed beef, omega-3 fatty acids are essential, and we're not consuming enough of it in the American diet. So if we can get this from a commonly consumed product like beef, that's a good thing. But what we're also finding is that animals that are grazing out on pasture and picking up a lot of different plant compounds, phytonutrients, from a large variety of plants, that these compounds get incorporated into their meat. And these are compounds with anti-inflammatory effects, antioxidant effects, antibacterial effects, and the list goes on. And it's really there where we see big differences compared to animals that are finished on corn-based rations.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I'm curious about you're at the university. You're in Utah.
Utah State University.
Utah State University. So this field is kind of an emergent field, is it not? Why don't you talk a little bit about the field, like how it started, how many places are doing it, including your university, and what you see evolving in the next few years with this field?
Yeah, the field of nutrient density testing. I mean, it's, the techniques that are being used are called omics techniques, and it's a fancy word of saying metabolomics or proteomics, which is basically a large-scale study of a lot of proteins or different metabolites. Now, metabolites are products of metabolism. The animal has metabolism, but many of these metabolites can serve as nutrients to us: vitamins, minerals, amino acids, fatty acids, and as well as polyphenols. So improvements in these techniques have made it more accessible, more cost efficient. So I think that's part of why there's much more testing going on. And the other part of it is just that regenerative agriculture has been growing a lot in recent times. And I also think consumers have become much more interested in the composition of their food and the healthfulness of their food.
So did you approach this, getting into also soil health for this and meat and regenerative ag, from the perspective of nutrition originally? Like, what's your background in?
Yeah, my background is actually not in per se agriculture. I was trained in muscle physiology, particularly muscle protein physiology in humans. But earlier on in my career, I was doing a lot of muscle protein synthesis work in response to whole foods, because people had studied protein shakes, but not really what happens when you consume an egg or a piece of meat.
Yeah, interesting.
And we were studying human muscle and looking at maybe how people also with different disease states, people with diabetes, chronic kidney disease, athletes, how their muscle makeup was, their metabolism, and how it got impacted by the foods that they ate. And it was really interesting because when we started to do this type of analysis in meat, we actually found it was really eye-opening for me, because when we were studying the meat or the muscle of grass-fed cattle, they looked more like the athletes, the human athletes that I'd studied in the past. And then if I look at the muscle of grain-fed animals, it looked not as healthy, not as metabolically healthy, if that makes sense. So it's really interesting to see that, to saw that analogy over time, and the difference between the variety of these meats and how metabolism impacts this.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So have you also looked at the study of, non-athlete related people? I would be curious to see if it is more similar to grain-fed cattle.
Yeah, in a way it is. To put it blunt, it's like the grass-fed animals, they had more mitochondria. This is what you see in an endurance-trained athletes. And the grain-fed animals, they looked more like maybe a couch potato phenotype, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Wow. There's a lot of people criticizing meat and the health impacts of meat. Where do you stand on that?
When you eat meat as part of a healthy diet,
well-rounded.
Yeah. Well-rounded, or not as bunch of an ultra-processed diet. And actually, this is supported well by the literature. Like, if you eat meat as part of a Mediterranean diet, or a bold diet, or a mind diet, or a traditional Japanese diet, or whatever diet you want to have it, all these diets have in common that they're made up of whole foods. And eating meat as part of that diet, then the associations of red meat with cancer, heart disease, they all seem to disappear and become relatively neutral. So it does seem like the overall diet quality matters a lot, and this is always the case. So eating a steak with a salad, or eating it as an ultra-processed takeout meal is not the same. It does not get the same health effect. So to me, and this is what we found in many studies as well, we've done, for instance, a randomized controlled trial where we gave people a good amount of meat. This was one of the goals of that study. It's like, what if we give people a lot of meat, but we give them as part of a Standard American diet or as part of a whole foods diet? Well, their meat intake was doubled compared to what they normally consume, but everyone got healthier because they were consuming a whole foods diet instead of a Standard American diet.
Just to go into that study a little bit, so I have personally interested, I think most specifically with the nutrition field within the food field overall, but when you're selecting participants for that, what does your ideal candidate look like? Are they eating whole food diets already? Probably not, but are they probably also not necessarily eating American quintessential diet? Like how do you select for that?
Well, in this particular study, we wanted to study we recruited middle-aged Americans that were overweight or obese.
Okay, yeah.
So what that meant is that they were likely consuming a Standard American diet.
So you were able to show improvement by feeding them lots of meat.
Well, we were able to show them improvement by eating a high-quality diet that
Whole
included
foods.
meat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. High quality diet that
Yeah, just whole foods, fruits, vegetables, meat, milk, eggs. Yeah.
So the USDA has its standards for what a healthy meal is.
MyPlate.
The MyPlate. You've seen the MyPlate thing USDA
Yeah.
puts out. Do you think that is the right approach? I mean, how would you like?
Well, let me just pause real quick because MyPlate is the most recent, but what's more popularized is still the food pyramid.
Right.
So there's a mixed in there too.
Yeah. So I mean, if you were giving guidance to our listeners, how would you describe the ratios between those different things, like MyPlate does?
Yeah, it's a good question. The tricky part is you can be healthy on such a variety of diets, provided it is whole foods based. It becomes very nuanced, but for most people, probably like a ratio of maybe like 50% plant foods, 40% animal source food, something like that will probably cover most of the vitamin and mineral basis. But within that, you have a lot of freedom, right? So, and we see this in populations across the globe as well, where people have figured out how to be healthy on a wide variety of diets that are not per se at all the same, that contain various ratios. Closer to the equator, people probably eat more plant foods because of the availability. In Nordic countries, people eat a lot more animal source foods. Many people are healthy on that type of diet. And I think the common denominator is that, and that seems to be the case, that it's just low in ultra-processed foods, and they're high in healthy foods that nourish us, that are high in vitamins, that are high in minerals, that are high in phytonutrients. Typically, those come from whole foods, and we see an added benefits of whole foods, whether it be crops or animals that are raised in what we now call more regenerative systems, or however you want to put it, more complex systems, but animals raised on diverse pastures. Crops grown in more diverse or more integrated systems that maybe have multi-cropping, that maybe have animal integration where possible. You can tell that these things result in a more nutrient-dense product.
That's so interesting. And so how many different ranches have you tested the meat for in the country?
That's a good question. Probably around 200 or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's a combination of both regenerative and commodity?
Well, that's an interesting side note, is that together with the Bionutrient Institute, we opened that study up to anyone who wanted to send samples. And who were the folks that wanted to send in samples?
It was sort of people.
Yeah, and like the creme de la creme of like the grass-fed beef, right? People that thought like, well,
White Oak Pastures.
Yeah, the Gay Browns of this world, and people that were really, and many other producers who were doing a phenomenal job, but most of them rotational grazing on biodiverse pastures. And they had the feeling like, well, I think my animals are healthier, I think my lands look better, I'm thinking this is a more nutritious piece of meat, but I want to have data to support that. So we did that, and when we studied them, we were like, well, we had no real
There's no baseline.
Yeah, that's right. So
it's the beginning. I mean, you've set the baseline now, haven't you?
Yeah, but you're at the top.
At the top of the.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, are you guys now looking for a lot of commodity beef to show the difference?
Well, what we did was we ended up buying commodity beef. So we would go to grocery stores and buy both grass-fed and grain-fed beef. What we found was, so every grass-fed piece of grass-fed beef that we tested from regenerative farms, they were high quality. In the grocery store, beef was a real hit or miss. We've tested some grass-fed beef that was labeled grass-fed, and it kind of doesn't look like grass-fed beef. But I mean, that's how it was marketed, how it was labeled. So we gotta believe it. But it was a real mixed bag. But we also tested really high quality grass-fed beef just from the grocery store. And then what we did with grain-fed beef too, bought in the grocery store, but we also worked with farmers that, this is not an official scientific term, but what I sometimes refer to as like an artisanal feedlot. It is maybe finishing animals on 50% corn, 50% hay for 30 days, just to get some marbling in there, for instance, which is maybe what some people like.
Yeah, Country Natural Beef does something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And there's many producers like that. And
what about spent grains? Is there a difference?
yeah, we actually tested a farm recently in, we tested the samples before, but I was talking to them recently in California, and they get distiller's grain.
Distiller's grain, yeah.
From a microbrewery.
Yeah.
And you could tell that it was not grass-fed beef, but it was really high-quality beef. It was, they're finished on pasture, so what they did was they just put a bunk out with the distiller's grain, but they are on pasture, so you can self-select. And they're probably, at least what we saw in some previous studies, they're probably consuming 20-30% of their dry matter intake from the grains. So you can tell that it's slightly shifted, but it looks very much like high quality beef. And we actually tested various of those samples, and when we put them in like statistical models, we also tried to do using predictive modeling. And some samples that were not grass-fed, because technically they're not grass-fed, right? Because they fed a little bit of grain. They were being classified as grass-fed. The model could not distinguish between it. So
okay, that
meant that it was like.
I've had my intuition has been that would be the case, because I live in Sonoma County and we have grain people doing just what you described. And in terms of the meat quality between really good grass finished, totally grass, and those, I mean, they're very similar, actually. Yep. I can't tell the difference, really.
No, and nutritionally, they're also very similar. So that's why I think, the grass-fed and grain-fed is kind of binary, right? And it's probably more of a spectrum. And maybe the best way to say it would be pasture-finished, because...
That was the anvil.
The anvil.
They just blew the anvil up. Woo! I jumped, man. That was crazy. Yeah. So anyway...
from that topic, it makes sense if cows are self-selecting for what they want to eat. There is kind of this element of it. I mean, naturally, you're probably selecting what your body's looking for to some extent.
Yeah, and you have some checks and balances in the sense that they can regulate their intake, right? So they will consume some grain to satisfy energy needs, and also tastes probably pretty good. But they can also select from the pasture, so right. That way you can find a happy balance. And I actually think like that's a good way. And if you look at agriculture, at least how it was described in history, right? People used to always grow crops and raise
great animals.
Together. Yeah,
right.
That's right. And you would have the animal, the cattle graze the spent crop field, put nutrients back in, right? They pee, they poop, they trample, and then your field is fertilized for next year. This is how people did it prior to the large-scale application of external inputs.
And we need to do it again. I mean, I really think that's the future. We're going to have to integrate animals in a lot more than we have been, and it will create a healthier situation. I just did a podcast. My last podcast, it just dropped this week. It was with Michael Grunwald, who's written a book called "We're Eating the Earth," and his argument is that meat uses too much land, and we have to feed 9 billion people. That's true if you're doing the way we do it now, where we're growing all these grain crops and feeding animals from basically the Midwest is feeding animals. That doesn't make sense in the long term. But if you are integrating animals into crops in the Midwest that are human edible crops, it would be a different scene. It would be a different possibility, it seems to me, in terms of how much food you'd produce from 1 acre of land. Yeah,
and another important part, and that again requires kind of a shift in how we consume meat, but there's a lot of good research to suggest that multi-species grazing has ecological benefits, and it also has production benefits in terms of productivity. You're able to produce more pounds of meat per acre. I mean, we actually wrote a paper about this 2-3 years ago, and we try to make the case for the fact that, and this is what's more common in the past, but integrating cattle with goats or sheep, and perhaps even integrating small efficient herbivores. I know people run chickens after their cattle, but things like duck and geese, rabbits, very, very efficient herbivores. The problem is at the moment, like, how are you gonna find a market for that, right? Because it's just not
And
very.
it's a lot
very
of
common.
labor too.
A lot of labor as
Coordination,
well.
yeah.
Yeah, it's coordination, of course, that it
I
requires.
mean, as anything, but yeah.
Yeah, but you are able. But if the discussion is, well, how do we want to produce enough meat on in a grazing situation? That is definitely a way of doing it, and there's a good amount of research to suggest you're able to stack multiple enterprises on top of each other and produce more food. And then someone like White Oak Pastures does that, right? Because they have guinea pigs, rabbits, etc.
Yeah, it's cool. There used to be a ranch in Northern California called Bel Campo, and one time they had like 6 species, and you could see it. Like, you'd go out there, and it was very cool how they were doing that.
Yeah.
Sheep, goats, cattle.
It's Old McDonald's farm right there.
Old McDonald's. Yeah, it was very cool.
We hope you're enjoying this conversation of Flipping the Table. Please subscribe to this podcast and write us a brief review and give us a rating. These help us to improve the show and to build our audience. More listeners will help grow the movement to make food and farming solutions to many environmental, health, and social problems we face. It's easy. Please subscribe, review, and rate. Now back to the conversation.
So what's the future? I mean, what are you going to? Do you feel like you've tapped the field, or are you going to do more?
No.
And where do you go next?
Yeah, the field is not tapped yet. I'd say we're in the first or second inning of this for sure. I mean, we're learning a lot about, like, well, first of all, we have probably mapped out 1 to 2% of our food and what's in foods. I mean, if we really go all out on testing, we can maybe quantify several hundred, maybe 1,000, 1,500 metabolites. It's estimated that beef contains 30,000 unique compounds.
Wow.
We haven't mapped all of those yet. Probably if you go to like some crops, they're probably like, I don't know, it's all an estimation, like maybe hundreds of thousands of compounds in there. And we've, the USDA Nutrient Reference Database has an entry for about typically 30 to 50 or so. On our nutrition facts panel, we have like 13 nutrients that appear, but probably the what we call the food matrix contains 30,000, 100,000 metabolites. So we're still a long ways off to understand how complex food is, but now we know it's much more complex than we think. Another thing is that we also don't know how these things interact with each other, but it does seem that if you get these compounds from a whole food source, that the effect is stronger than just taking this from a supplement. So those are exciting things. And the other thing is that this comparison, there have been in the past comparisons of conventional versus organic, but in more regenerative agriculture, which has maybe an added layer of maybe multi-cropping systems or having more local context, right, in how you grow foods. Those comparisons are definitely in the early stages.
Okay. Well,
how do you think we have our nutrition label. You mentioned 13 is on there. Do you think it's going to change? Like from a I guess I would be a policy and federal standpoint of really demonstrating more nutrients and or switching the nutrients as we become more aware of what's involved? Yeah,
we're obviously limited by space on the nutrition facts panel, but I could see a QR code at some point.
I could see a QR code.
Right. Do you think it should change? I mean, there's kind of this balance of are we looking at the right things, I think, is some of the considerations that...
Yeah, in general, I think we are looking at the right things because many essential nutrients appear, but we also have to be realistic that we do have a metabolic health problem in the U.S., and while we've done a great job in eliminating the deficiency diseases, we don't have pellagra anymore, we don't have scurvy anymore, right? And
got a lot of diabetes.
Yeah, that's right. And as it's multifactorial, but one of the reasons or the ideas behind it is that we're not ingesting many of these antioxidant, anti-inflammatory compounds, these phytonutrients that have historically been part of a whole food diet. So we're not getting our classic nutrient deficiencies, but we are having metabolic diseases partly because of the poor intake of these nutrients.
Yeah. Well, the thing that struck me as you were speaking about the awareness that we're developing about the complexity of food, it made me think about the very similar pattern that's going on with our understanding the complexity of soil and the complexity of the gut, the human biome, of the gut biome. It's like and agriculture has become much more complex. I mean, running a farm, it was described earlier today how many things you have to know. You got to be a businessman, you got to understand biology, you got to understand ecosystems, you got to understand your animal health systems, you got to understand so many things to make it work. That's a good thing in my mind because diversity is the key to evolution, right? We got to have diversity as the engine of evolution, but it also is overwhelming because humans can't deal with much complexity, it doesn't seem.
No, yeah, I agree with that. It does seem for like we always tend to simplify things, and nature is not really that simple, right? Like nature is complex. But I do think we can observe these things. But I think where we as humans run into issues is that we try to dictate nature instead of working with nature, because I do think we have a good handle on. To an extent, like we see this diversity in ecosystems, we see that these things work, we see that these things work together. While we don't fully understand how it works, we can observe when it works and when it doesn't work. So I think sometimes we just gotta take a step back and be humble and try to work with nature. But so much of mankind in the past, we wanna change things, and that does not always work in our favor.
No, it hasn't. Certainly in agriculture, we've made a lot of mistakes. But it does seem that big data, I mean, in a sense, you're talking about the more complex it becomes, the more big data approaches you need, correct? And with AI and computing power now, it's going to go a lot quicker than it has in the past.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we started to integrate AI in our analysis, and the amount of and as well as machine learning, the amount of how easy it is to parse through complex data sets and recognize patterns and just that are, I mean, AI, I think, does a great job in making certain linkages in big data sets.
Seeing patterns.
Seeing patterns that we may not see immediately. I mean, in terms of the creativity, definitely not. But because that's what makes humans, and then we have that benefit. But going through complex data sets, I mean, I cannot look at a spreadsheet and look at the 1,000 rows and like, oh, this is connected to this, and this is connected to this. Whereas AI does a good job at doing that.
Absolutely. Can I throw in a last?
Yeah, go for it.
High-level question. Of all the research that you've done, or call it discoveries that have occurred, what's been the most shocking to you?
Well, the most shocking to me when we initially started on this work comparing grass-fed and grain-fed beef, a lot of the literature had suggested in the past that looked at omega-3 fatty acids, and that was the main difference. Now, we found that was indeed a major difference. There's not a lot of difference in protein content. Even some of the vitamins and minerals are not different. But once we started to look at a lot more nutrients using metabolomics profiling instead of looking at a handful of amino acids and fatty acids, we're looking at 1,000 compounds. And what we found there is that actually a 50% difference.
Wow.
So
that's huge.
Yeah, that was larger than I thought as well in the past. Yeah.
Did you do your graduate work in Holland, in the Netherlands?
No, I did it in the University of Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Were you in agriculture? Did you come from an agricultural family?
No, I grew up in a suburb. And
what part of the Netherlands?
Near Rotterdam.
Okay. Yeah.
But I subconsciously, we used to get our milk at a local
dairy. Yeah.
Go to farmers markets, and so I think it subconsciously cultivated that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I worked in Holland and ended up coming and doing the work I do now because I lived for 2 years in Holland, and I walked every day through the dairies because they have everything's open there and the markets were great. It's a fantastic place, and they have one of the greatest universities in the world, Groningen, right? I mean, it's an incredible agricultural university like UC Davis and you know Cornell and Illinois, and I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, definitely, and. I actually, a funny story was I went to business school. I got my undergrad degree in business. Then I got a master's in exercise and nutrition science, PhD in kinesiology.
Oh, wow.
Studying muscle biology in humans. And then, one day I just kind of rolled into it. I got called by two scientists, one from USDA. His name is Scott Kronberg. The other gentleman is Fred Provenza.
Oh, yeah. We talked about Fred yesterday with some people, yeah.
And they contacted me probably 5 years ago, and they said, well, we're looking to work with a human nutrition scientist in this area. Are you interested in maybe working together? So I think we applied for 15 grants and got number 16.
Wow.
So, or applied for 16 grants in that case. But, it was early on, and definitely I've seen a lot more traction for this work over the last few years. But that's kind of how I got started. And I was like, well, given that I was really deep into the metabolism of human muscle, turns out a cow is just another mammal, right? So it doesn't look that different. In fact, I always jokingly say it's like if I study a piece of human meat or human muscle or the meat of a cow, I cannot really tell the difference by the data. I can just say like this one is healthier than this one, but I don't really know if I'm looking at a human or a cow. But then that's kind of how I got into it, and then we started to broaden this to other livestock, and then now also a lot of plants and. Studying plants from regenerative versus organic versus conventional systems. We're seeing how different growing practices impact the nutrient density and
are crops the same? Is the same as meat? You get more from organic or regenerative than you do from commodity crops?
On a basis, I mean, on a whole, I would say yes. That's typically the case. There's always because we met like really good conventional producers as well, and good organic producers. But yes, in general, we see that in more regenerative systems, you get higher levels of specifically phytonutrients. I mean, it kind of think of it like that. It's like, let's say you have the crop, right? Let's say you have a
garbanzo bean.
A garbanzo bean. Yeah, let's talk about a garbanzo bean. So you have a garbanzo bean, a chickpea, and if those are grown in more of a complex system, maybe with multi-cropping, and the plant, the way that it infects in the environment is through these phytochemicals, through polyphenols, alkaloids. So if the animal, I should say, if the plant has some complexity, maybe some healthy competition amongst other plants, has maybe the right amount of water, but has a little bit of stress, has to work a little bit to grow itself instead of being babied with a lot of fertilizer, a lot of external inputs, pesticides. It seems like it gets more robust, and it starts to produce these phytochemical compounds that have health benefits to us, but they also provide a deeper flavor. And I think the easiest way to look at that is that if you maybe get a carrot in more of a regenerative system, and it's very fresh, it's very has a very deep flavor, versus maybe more of a commodity carrot that does not taste as rich. And this is something we can taste in our crops for sure. I mean that deepness of flavor, that complexity of flavor is given by the phytochemicals. And if we can stimulate the plant in a right way with the right level of stress, we get more of these flavor compounds, and as a result, more of these health benefits.
And that's why the great wineries of the world are all going towards these systems, regenerative approaches, and because they get more flavor.
And that's why we're having such great food this weekend, too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, hey, Stephan, this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate your work, what you're bringing to the table in this whole kind of emerging conversation in the country and the world around regenerative. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed the show. Please share it with your friends and listen to our next monthly episode of Flipping the Table, hosted by Roots of Change, a program of the Public Health Institute, a nonprofit organization dedicated to building a healthier world.